Yesterday I had a very helpful conversation with Venerable Semke, and she asked me what I have been working on in my practice recently. And I told her that I saw a lot of anger that I had carried around for a very, very, very long time. It's like anger that sort of gets built into your identity and how you see the world and how you see yourself. And so we were talking about this, and I think she was the one who said, "That's the mind of grievance." And I said, "Yes, that's exactly it. I have seen how I have a very strong mind of grievance. And I've sort of known it's there for a long time, but I think it's what's going on in the country lately and politics, the election. It seems like everybody has a grievance. Everybody is carrying around something that they're angry about, something they're resentful about, a reason to fear or hate or demonize some other group that really ripped them off or did something terrible. And just seeing that out in the environment, it's reflecting back to me what my own mind of grievance looks like. And it's become so clear how harmful and pointless it is. It's just icky, it's just poison, and it cuts off any possibility of healing that past anger or moving beyond. When I have this, mind of the minority, the triple minority, I feel like a victim. I feel like someone's going to come up and attack me. And that's just not a way I want to live my life anymore. It seemed to serve a purpose before, to keep me safe or to help me discriminate between the kinds of people I want to be around, the kinds of people I don't. But I just want to really get rid of all of that stuff because it's really just, serves no purpose. So thankfully, I have a really good example of how to let go of the mind of grievance. And I thought this quote, before we move on, this quote from the Dhammapada, it really describes the limits of holding on to past harms. And the ending line is quite popular. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred, only by love alone." And this seems straightforward, but it's really hard to let go. I found it's hard to let go of things that I just can't agree with. I can't fully understand yet, things that are atrocious. But there's no sense in having that aversion. It doesn't help. So the person who I think I can look to help me let go of grievance is my grandmother. So this is a picture taken at the Manila airport in 1963 with my grandmother's on the right, and then my father is the little boy with the watch, and then that's my aunts and uncles, and then the woman on the left is my great-grandmother, who I never met. But my grandmother, she was born in the early 1920s in the Philippines, and when she was just 18 years old, the Japanese Imperial Army invaded the Philippines on December 8th, 1941. That was just 10 hours after they attacked Pearl Harbor. So it was pretty strategic timing, I think. And my grandmother was newly married, and she had one daughter. And my oldest aunt, who's still alive, she's the one on the left next to my great-grandmother. And my grandfather at the time was a soldier in the Philippine Army, and as soon as the Japanese invaded, he fled for the mountains. They lived kind of in the northern part of the main island, and it was very mountainous province, and he just went there. And apparently the guerrilla forces were really successful during that time, and they prevented like 60% of the country from going over into Japanese rule. And so what happened when the Japanese army arrived in her hometown is they captured her and imprisoned her and my aunt, and they were holding her in the hopes that he would come out of hiding and surrender. And that never happened. yeah, he never gave up. She never gave up. And sh this is a story she loved to tell. She told it many times, and I think it's an awesome story, so I'm going to share it today. But first, a little bit of history, which I didn't know so well, honestly. So when the Japanese invaded the Philippines, the defending Philippine and U.S. armies were under the command of General Douglas MacArthur. He looks like quite a character, and he was the designated commander of the U.S. Armed Forces in the Asia Pacific. And unfortunately, Venerable Solchum just told me a few minutes ago that he really dropped the ball. And he had 15 hours of notice that the Japanese were going to attack, but he didn't do anything. And so all the planes got destroyed, and yeah, the Philippine army totally lost, and MacArthur had to retreat to Australia, where he then came up with a plan to come back later on. And as a result of that invasion, they captured about 80,000 Philippine and U.S. troops, and is sort of the most popular incident is called the Bataan Death March. They made 80,000 of these troops march 65 miles to the north. The Philippine army tried to hold out for a few months, but then they had no more food, so they had to come out of the siege. They were under siege. And so when they came out, they surrendered and they made them walk. And anywhere between 5,000 to 18,000 Filipinos died, and there were up to 650 American troops who died in that death march. And according to Wikipedia, the Japanese forced many Filipino men into labor, and more than 1,000 women, girls, and gay men, some as young as 10, were forcibly taken as comfort women and kept in sexual slavery by the Japanese during their occupation. And this is quite popular in other places, I think China. There's a lot of awareness about that, but it was sort of something they did wherever they invaded. And the Filipinos that were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese were kidnapped from the population and were routinely gang raped, tortured, and humiliated. Many of them had their breasts cut off or received damaging wounds when they fought back against the soldiers' sexual advancements. Many were also murdered and disposed of like animals. The Japanese also sent doctors and surgeons to the Philippines who performed human experimentation on native Filipinos. Some of these experiments included amputations, dissections, and suturing blood vessels of live humans. Surgeons gruesomely performed vivisections on Filipinos. And before such experiments, the victims were forced by the Japanese to dig their own graves first. So we have heard of similar behavior happening elsewhere during World War II with the Nazi soldiers on the Jewish people and others. So my grandmother, I mentioned she loved to tell the time of her captivity with the Japanese, and there was always one word she used to describe the soldiers who held her captive. And it always blew my mind. She said they were kind. And my grandmother had a very unique and bold personality. She usually didn't dress so flashy, but I think this was a special occasion. But she was a very dignified person. She had like this natural air of dignity and grace. She was very courageous and self-confident. And nothing that ever happened to her in her life could ever shake her faith in God and the goodness of humanity. And she would say whatever she thought, even if it would make people really uncomfortable. But she was never cruel or like impulsive. And I can't remember her ever speaking badly about anybody, which is just mind blowing in this day and age. And she was nothing but kind and generous to both family and friends. And I'm sorry, family and strangers. So I was wondered, why in the world did she think the Japanese were kind, given the history of what happened? And she said, well, they actually treated me with respect. And yes, this was unusual. I think she was definitely an outlier. And why did they treat her with respect? It's because I think she didn't show any fear. And also, they were from an upper class family in the town that might have also helped. But She was extremely fearless and bold, and they kept telling her, if you don't tell us where your husband is, we're going to kill you. And she said, fine, go right ahead. Just cut off my head and send it to my parents so they know I'm dead. That was her response to them. And so as a result, I think, they respected that. And she did say that the other women and children that they took into captivity didn't do so well. They definitely abused them and took advantage of them. But for some reason, she had the karma, and I think her the way she treated them also was probably very kind, because that's just how she treated everyone. So this is a picture that she loved to show, and this is a Japanese soldier holding my aunt when she was a baby. And again, it's like not something you would really expect to see. The soldier imprisoning somebody holding their baby. And yeah, when I asked her why she didn't resent the Japanese, she said they were just like us. They were just regular men who didn't have a choice. They were forced into the army. All they wanted to do was get back home to their families. And I guess they told her that, and they really did miss their families. Hence, they picked up my aunt. And she really focused on the common humanity. And I think they really appreciated that. So my grandmother taught me many other things, like spirituality is the source of real happiness, how kindness and generosity and ethical conduct are the way to live a meaningful life. Her refuge in God was just unshakable. She died a very peaceful death, and she really lived up to the Christian ideals of charity, humility, and compassion. So I really owe a lot to her. And so we're now entering the Chenrezig retreat for the winter, and this mind of grievance is something I really want to work at, and I think Chenrezig is going to help with that. And to tear down that wall that I've built up around my heart based on all the injustice, all the tragedy, all the craziness that has happened to me personally and has happened in the world just since I've been born and watched what's happening, and to sort of restore my faith in the goodness of humanity, because she never doubted that, and that's always what she really looked for. She always looked for the good in people. And to remember that no matter what somebody does to you, there is no reason that you can't see your common humanity. You can't appreciate that they're just caught up in their own karma and their own craziness, and they really have very limited choice, and they can become a friend if you are able to look past what they do, the things that they do, and to try and establish that connection, because it always can be made. And we've heard many stories about people making friends with people who have harmed them or their family members, and it's definitely possible. So why not me? I think I'm gonna try this out and try and see everybody as a friend, just like she saw this Japanese soldier.